In this film, what we're going to do is we're going to take a sort of muscle memory chord progression move, and then what we're going to do in post-production is to make it a bit more interesting. What tends to happen when we make music is that we reach for chords that we know already and that we've practiced 1,000 times before, and sometimes it's a good idea to record those and just kind of go with the vibe and then go back in post-production and see if you can make things a little bit more interesting. So let's start with something really basic. Okay, so there's a sort of basic 8-bar progression, and what we could do, just to make sure that from a timing point of view we're feeling very comfortable, is we could quantize it. Okay, so what I've done there is I've played, let's just open up the piano roll display so we can see it clearly, and just make that a little smaller so we can see all of it at once. As you can see from the bass notes, that what I've done is to play C major, and then A minor, and then D minor, and then F major, and then G major, and I've kind of arpeggiated the right hand, so we get a little bit of movement, a little bit of interest. However, these chords are really familiar. Straight away, you're going to have heard pieces that use these chords lots of times before. So it's now going to be a question of whether or not we can do something interesting here, just kind of to make them feel a little bit more like they're our own. Well, I'm just kind of interested, first of all, in starting by saying, okay, well, actually, what if we don't make the first chord sort of explicitly C major? What I'm going to do is to take the E's from this chord. I'm just going to take them down to a D and just see what that sounds like. Okay, that's kind of a bit more interesting. It's a little bit more mine now. What I'm going to do is to keep the D running through the A minor chord too. Let's just put a loop around the whole thing so we're not always starting from the bar earlier. Okay, that's actually working really nicely because the D is kind of preceded, so that when we get to D minor it kind of feels a bit more significant here. But I'm wondering if we might be able to do something a bit more interesting here. Let's just see what happens if we take that F down to an E. This one can be an F, that one could go up to a G, and then maybe we could take that one up to an A, just so you can see that we've just got this slight sense of a rise happening here. And then, bearing in mind we're going to end up on an F there, what I might do is to take that one back to a G. Let's just see what that sounds like. That's nice. Okay, so what we've then got is a G here at the bottom. We've got kind of created this sort of almost like a melodic shape that's kind of rising and then falling back to this F, and we kind of then lose that because we're sort of dropping to, well, sort of nowhere. So what I'm going to do is to invert these, take these Gs up an octave, just so we kind of get this sense of this shape just continuing. And what I might do here is to just see what happens if we bring that down to an F, and then maybe here a little E. I don't know, might work, might not. I'm going to take that down to a D rather than have the B, just again, so we're kind of creating a little bit of variation. Okay, that's working well. What I'm also doing now is just looking sort of at the whole thing from a sort of macroscopic point of view, just looking at all of those notes together. And what I'm noticing is that because of the way that we've kind of coloured these chords, I've got a D running through every single chord apart from this F chord, and that seems a bit too sweet to me at the moment. I'm just wondering whether or not if we take these notes up to a D, what will happen then? Now, by doing that, we're actually retaining, we're actually sort of changing the shape of this chord. We're sort of saying, okay, well, there was a D minor here, and there's kind of a D minor here again. You can see I've got an A and a D and an F, the three notes of F minor, and I've moved, because the chord's coming up to what was an F major, we've got an F in the bass, so that's now just become a D minor, what's called a first inversion. We've inverted that chord, so we've still got notes from D minor, but rather than using the root note, the bottom note of the scale, we've gone up to an F, the first inversion of the D minor. Let's just see what that sounds like. I like that. It's darker than it was before because we don't have the sweetness of the F, but actually, to be honest, that's kind of nice. That's working in quite an interesting way. So what I'm now wondering is whether or not we can actually do something kind of more interesting with some of these notes here. All of these kind of repeated Gs. Well, let's keep a sort of sense of C major here, but what we're going to do is to just take the last one in each of those bars, and we're going to take that down to an E, so still a note from that chord. Again, what I'm going to do here maybe is the same thing with the A minor chord. Again, A minor has got an E in it, so let's just take those down to an E as well. Then what we're doing is we're moving to our D minor. We've got our little notes here. We've already got the E that's working here really nicely, and we've got the sort of this shape moving up to an E and then to an F and then up to our G and our A. That little melodic section, maybe it would be too confusing to have the left hand move there. We'll see. But what I might do, just as we begin to come back down here, is to move these notes too. Let's just take that one down to a G and see what happens next. Okay, that's kind of interesting too. Let's just see what happens if we just do take those down to an E. Now, obviously, again, this is going to be slightly odd. What we've got here is a D minor chord, and we're adding the second note of the scale here. And it might be that it's too much, particularly with this movement going up, and actually something like an F part of the D minor chord would be a sort of safer move. But we'll worry about safety in a minute. Let's just try something a little bit more interesting. What I'm also going to do with these notes is, just so we hear them a bit more prominently, I'm just going to turn their velocity up a little bit, just so we get a little bit more strength in them. Let's just see what that sounds like. Okay, so that is a little bit too rich. That's not working quite so nicely. So let's just take those up to an F. But what I'm wondering now is whether or not, bearing in mind we've moved up to an F there, whether dropping this note down to a D, just so we're reinforcing the fact that we are in D minor, even though we've got an inverted chord there, might be quite nice. And what we could then do would be to copy the D to here, where our G chord is, and have it last through as a sort of secondary bass note. Let's just try that. Okay, so you can begin to see what we're doing here by simply going back in post-production and saying, okay, well actually let's just take the sweetness, the sort of rounded edges of what feels really familiar to play, and let's just spend some time breaking things down and looking for some more interesting notes. Then what we end up with is something which is much more our own. Of course, we could just keep going here, just slowly making this even more obscure. We haven't even looked at the bass line in terms of creating some passing notes, some movement that maybe would be nice between each individual chord, and we could do that next. But you can begin to see that by going through in post-production, you can get away from the kind of muscle memory of chord shapes that you would just play in real time.